But I had a feeling she might try something when the wall appeared, and when she did, I wanted a full playbook ready to go. That night I didn't sleep either, not from worry, but from excitement. Karen had crossed a line that wasn't just about me anymore. She had made a habit of it, pushing neighbors, twisting rules, stomping around with her clipboard and fake citations like she was queen of the hill. But I knew something she didn't. That tractor path wasn't just a road. It was a fuse, and she'd already lit it. All I had to do now was wait for her next move. And when she parked there again, I'd be ready. Hay stacked high, cameras rolling, and me watching quietly, ready to build the biggest, fluffiest wall she'd ever seen. 3 days later, the trap set itself. I had been watching the live feed from the trail cam while nursing a sore shoulder from stacking bales the night before. The alert chimed just past 11 in the morning, and there it was on my phone screen. Karen's white SUV crawling down the road like a shark circling shallow water. She stopped right where she had before, right across my tractor path. This time, she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She stepped out in yoga pants and sunglasses, adjusted the hood of her designer sweatshirt, and casually unfolded her aluminum lawn chair again. The SUV blocked the path clean through, nose to fence post, tailgate kissing the cattle guard. It was perfect. Too perfect. I waited. She sat scrolling her phone, sipping something from a travel mug. 10 minutes. 15. I gave it 20, then I fired up the tractor. The engine grumbled to life like a sleeping beast, and I drove around the barn, staying low behind the slope where she couldn't see me coming. I had already stacked the first load of hay bales on the trailer. Tight rows, neat and square, the kind you'd see in a fall festival photo. I rolled up slowly, watching from a distance. She didn't look up. The wind carried the low hum of the engine, but she was too absorbed in her phone to notice. I stopped about 30 feet away, climbed down, and started unloading. One by one, I placed the bales around the SUV, first the sides, then the rear. I left the front open for a minute in case she suddenly decided to move, but she didn't. Once the walls reached the height of the hood, I took a quick break, wiping sweat from my forehead and snapping a photo from the trail cam angle. The image was priceless. Her SUV looked like it had been swallowed by a golden fortress. By the time I built the fourth wall, closing her in entirely, she finally noticed. I didn't hear the exact moment, but I saw her shadow stand up through a gap in the bales. A second later, her voice cut across the field like a buzzsaw. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. I kept stacking. Another bale, then another. She came storming around the wall, trying to squeeze through, but the space was too tight. She had to turn sideways just to get out. Her face was red, eyes wide with fury and disbelief. She marched right up to me, stopping a few feet away, not quite daring to get close enough to grab my arm. "This is harassment. This is destruction of private property. This is illegal." I didn't speak. I just pointed to the ground where her SUV's tires sat parked across my deed access road. Then I pointed to the new laminated sign she had tried to saw off 3 days ago, now bolted into a steel post and cement. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. I returned to the tractor. I had a few decorative touches left to add. 2 scarecrows, one holding a tiny fake parking ticket, the other wearing a construction hat and sunglasses. I placed them right at the corners, facing outward like sentinels. Then I placed a handwritten note and a plastic sleeve and pinned it to the top bale. Not a threat, not an insult, just one line. "Next time, park like a neighbor." Karen spun in place, her phone out, filming everything, narrating like she was a crime scene reporter. "He trapped my car. He built a hay prison. He's crazy. He's going to pay for this." She was pacing now, still filming, kicking at the hay with her foot like it would somehow fall apart. It didn't. I built it right, even wind-resistant. She couldn't move the bales. She couldn't back out. The only open spot was too narrow, and trying to squeeze out would scratch her bumper. That's when the deputy pulled up. I had expected her to call the sheriff, and I had already spoken to him the week before. He was an old family friend, and I had explained everything. Shared the videos, the fire incident, even the saw post. He couldn't take sides, of course, but he made it clear I had every right to secure my property so long as I didn't damage hers. And I hadn't. The deputy stepped out, gave me a long look, then turned to Karen. She unloaded every complaint she had in a single breath, waving her phone around like a sword. She parked her shiny white SUV right across my tractor path, while my barn was literally on fire, and then sat on a folding chair like it was a picnic. That was the moment I realized Karen didn't just want control. She wanted war. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of dry hay catching flame. My boots hit the gravel like thunder as I sprinted across the yard, calling out for her to move the vehicle. She didn't even flinch, just raised a hand in a slow wave and turned up the volume on her little Bluetooth speaker, playing some soft piano nonsense, as if the panic around her didn't exist. I couldn't believe it. Flames licking the sky, my animals screeching in panic, and there she was, blocking my only direct route to the barn like she owned the place. But she didn't. I did. I had 27 seconds to make a decision. Either wait for her to move, she wouldn't, or take the rough north trail with the tractor and risk snapping an axle. I muttered a curse under my breath, yanked the tractor into gear, and jolted toward the rocky trail behind the property. That path hadn't been used in years, and for good reason. Every dip and rut hit like a sledgehammer. The trailer clanged, and I gritted my teeth, holding the wheel tight as it veered sideways through brush and broken fencing. By the time I got to the barn, the fire had taken a good bite out of the northeast corner. I was able to put it out before it spread too far, but the damage had already been done. A whole wall blackened, 2 days' worth of feed ruined, and my nerves frayed to threads. I didn't say a word when I came back around the front. Karen was still there, legs crossed, a smirk on her face like she'd just done me a favor. That's when I decided I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't argue. I'd plan. Karen had been trying to push my buttons for weeks, ever since the HOA redrew their neighborhood map and tried to include part of my property for visual consistency. I refused, of course. That little stretch of tractor path that cut past the edge of her backyard was on my deed, had been since 1949. But Karen didn't believe in deeds. She believed in declarations, like she was the queen of a castle made of complaint forms and petty rules. I had ignored her when she left handwritten notes taped to my fence. I ignored her when she called animal control because my rooster crowed too loud. I even ignored her when she stood outside my gate at 6 o'clock in the morning, shouting that my barn color violated HOA aesthetics. But I wasn't going to ignore her blocking my path while I tried to stop a barn fire. That was a line she couldn't uncross. Later that evening, as the sun bled red over the ridge and the barn still smoldered faintly, I sat on my porch and thought back. Karen had moved here a year ago, trading some suburban corner lot for her version of country living. Except instead of embracing the land, she tried to manicure it like a golf course. She didn't like the smell of cows, or the way the chickens kicked dust, or how we left our lights off to see the stars. She wanted us all to act like we were still in a subdivision, and when we didn't, she retaliated in the way only Karen could: passive-aggressive letters, phony citations, and increasingly absurd stunts like today. I cracked open a warm root beer and leaned back in my chair, watching the stars blink through the haze. That was when the idea came to me. I didn't want a shouting match. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted something quiet, visual, and impossible to ignore. I wanted to build a wall, not out of bricks or threats, but out of hay. Karen wanted to block tractors with SUVs. Fine. I'd surround her SUV with a fortress of bales so high she'd have to call the fire department to breathe. I pictured the scene in my mind. Karen flailing, yelling into her phone, unable to open her doors. I smiled for the first time all day, but this wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message. She wanted to test the limits of what she could get away with. She wanted to flex her imaginary power. Blocking my tractor path during an emergency wasn't just petty, it was dangerous. And if I didn't do something loud in a quiet way, she'd keep pushing. I wouldn't give her a reason to call the law on me. Everything I planned would be legal, documented, precise, and above all, undeniable. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing the flames, the blocked path, the empty look in her eyes as she watched my barn burn. But I also kept picturing that wall, layer by layer, bale by bale, like bricks in a joke only I understood. The next morning, I pulled out the deed to the land, flipped to the page that marked the path as private and unrestricted, and snapped a photo. Then I made a list. Supplies, witnesses, cameras. I was going to do this right. Karen had no idea what she'd sparked when she parked that SUV. She thought she'd won, thought I'd huff and puff and stomp my boots, and eventually give in like everyone else in her little HOA bubble. But I didn't play by her rules. I played by the rules of the land, and the land always remembers who it belongs to. Tomorrow, she'd find out the hard way, and the best part was, I wasn't even going to speak a word, just build, just watch, just wait. The morning came with a crisp breeze that rustled the dry leaves outside my window. I rolled out of bed before the sun crested the hills and stepped out onto the porch with my coffee in one hand and a printed copy of my property deed in the other. The spot where Karen had parked was quiet now, but the dirt showed the deep imprints of her SUV's tires. A perfect reminder. My path, my land, and my right to use it however I saw fit. She hadn't come by since the fire. I figured she was either hiding from embarrassment or preparing another move in her little HOA power game. Either way, I wasn't about to wait for her to strike again. Today I was going to start gathering everything I needed, quietly, calmly, carefully. I started at the feed store where I'd done business for years. The old man behind the counter raised an eyebrow when I asked about fresh hay bales in bulk. I need a few dozen, nice and square and stacked tight, I told him. He looked at me the way a man looks at another who's either gone mad or found religion. I gave him a smile and said I was doing some decorative fencing for a fall event. Technically not a lie. The order would be ready by sundown, and I had just enough space in the barn to keep them dry while I waited. I drove to the county office and had a copy of the original 1949 land plat certified. I circled the tractor path with a red pen and took a photo with my phone. If Karen wanted to claim authority over that road again, I was going to bury her in facts before I buried her SUV in hay. I swung by the diner for lunch, and it wasn't long before word started trickling in from the regulars. Apparently, Karen had already filed a new complaint with the HOA board about my so-called aggressive tractor driving. One of the waitresses, whose brother happened to be on the board, mentioned Karen had even printed out a blurry screenshot from one of her outdoor cameras to back up her nonsense. I chuckled. Let her try. She had no idea I'd already gathered more than she could imagine. Back at home, I set up the old trail cams I used during deer season, one on the gate post, one in the oak tree that overlooked the path, and a third facing the old feed bin, perfectly angled to catch anything that happened along the road. I sensed the feeds to my phone and gave them a test run. Every twig that moved now pinged my phone with a snapshot. The bales arrived just after sunset, loaded up on 2 flatbeds, and stacked so tight they looked like gold bars made of straw. I waved the driver off, hauled them in, and got to work rearranging the barn to make space. Each bale was a piece of the plan, each strand of hay a thread in a quiet story I was about to tell. I spent the next day driving through the back roads, visiting folks who had been on the wrong end of Karen's rulebook. The Dawsons had been fined for having a hand-painted mailbox. The Barkers were warned about their toddlers' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. And the Wilsons, bless them, had received a notice claiming their garden gnomes were causing emotional distress to passing residents. One by one, I listened. I didn't ask them to act. I just asked for their stories, their letters, their photos. They handed over stacks of them, grateful to be heard. Nobody liked her. Most had just been too tired or too polite to push back. I wasn't. On the third day, I found myself standing on the path again, looking at the tire marks that still hadn't faded. I dragged a shovel behind me and dug out the post hole for a new sign. I bolted it in, painted in big black letters. Nothing rude, just a reminder. Private road. Do not block. It wouldn't stop her, I knew that. But it gave me a legal marker, something to point to when the time came. And the time was coming soon. That evening, just before twilight, I watched from the porch as Karen's SUV rolled down the road again. She paused when she saw the sign. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. She stared at it long and hard, then stepped out of the vehicle. I stayed seated. She didn't look over. Instead, she walked straight to the post, grabbed it with both hands, and yanked. It didn't budge. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small hacksaw, and began sawing through the bottom. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. She didn't hear me, too busy grunting and struggling as the saw bucked against the wood. She didn't finish the job, just gave up and kicked the post before climbing back into her SUV and speeding off. My phone buzzed. The trail cam caught every second, her face or saw, her foot to the post. I downloaded the clip and saved it to 3 different drives. My case was getting airtight. I wouldn't need it for the hay wall, not directly, but I had a feeling she might try something when the wall appeared. And when she did, I wanted a full playbook ready to go. That night I didn't sleep either, not from worry, but from excitement. Karen had crossed a line that wasn't just about me anymore. She had made a habit of it, pushing neighbors, twisting rules, stomping around with her clipboard and fake citations like she was queen of the hill. But I knew something she didn't. That tractor path wasn't just a road. It was a fuse, and she'd already lit it. All I had to do now was wait for her next move. And when she parked there again, I'd be ready, hay stacked high, cameras rolling, and me watching quietly, ready to build the biggest, fluffiest wall she'd ever seen. 3 days later, the trap set itself. I had been watching the live feed from the trail cam while nursing a sore shoulder from stacking bales the night before. The alert chimed just past 11 in the morning, and there it was on my phone screen. Karen's white SUV crawling down the road like a shark circling shallow water. She stopped right where she had before, right across my tractor path. This time she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She stepped out in yoga pants and sunglasses, adjusted the hood of her designer sweatshirt, and casually unfolded her aluminum lawn chair again. The SUV blocked the path clean through, nose to fence post, tailgate kissing the cattle guard. It was perfect. Too perfect. I waited. She sat scrolling her phone, sipping something from a travel mug. 10 minutes. 15. I gave it 20, then I fired up the tractor. The engine grumbled to life like a sleeping beast, and I drove around the barn, staying low behind the slope where she couldn't see me coming. I had already stacked the first load of hay bales on the trailer. Tight rows, neat and square, the kind you'd see in a fall festival photo. I rolled up slowly, watching from a distance. She didn't look up. The wind carried the low hum of the engine, but she was too absorbed in her phone to notice. I stopped about 30 feet away, climbed down, and started unloading. One by one, I placed the bales around the SUV, first the sides, then the rear. I left the front open for a minute in case she suddenly decided to move, but she didn't. Once the walls reached the height of the hood, I took a quick break, wiping sweat from my forehead and snapping a photo from the trail cam angle. The image was priceless. Her SUV looked like it had been swallowed by a golden fortress. By the time I built the 4th wall, closing her in entirely, she finally noticed. I didn't hear the exact moment, but I saw her shadow stand up through a gap in the bales. A second later, her voice cut across the field like a buzzsaw. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. I kept stacking. Another bale, then another. She came storming around the wall, trying to squeeze through, but the space was too tight. She had to turn sideways just to get out. Her face was red, eyes wide with fury and disbelief. She marched right up to me, stopping a few feet away, not quite daring to get close enough to grab my arm. "This is harassment. This is destruction of private property. This is illegal." I didn't speak. I just pointed to the ground where her SUV's tires sat parked across my deed access road. Then I pointed to the new laminated sign she had tried to saw off 3 days ago, now bolted into a steel post and cement. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. I returned to the tractor. I had a few decorative touches left to add. 2 scarecrows, one holding a tiny fake parking ticket, the other wearing a construction hat and sunglasses. I placed them right at the corners, facing outward like sentinels. Then I placed a handwritten note in a plastic sleeve and pinned it to the top bale. Not a threat, not an insult, just one line. Next time, park like a neighbor. Karen spun in place, her phone out, filming everything, narrating like she was a crime scene reporter. He trapped my car. He built a hay prison. He's crazy. He's going to pay for this. She was pacing now, still filming, kicking at the hay with her foot like it would somehow fall apart. It didn't. I built it right, even wind resistant. She couldn't move the bales. She couldn't back out. The only open spot was too narrow, and trying to squeeze out would scratch her bumper. That's when the deputy pulled up. I had expected her to call the sheriff, and I had already spoken to him the week before. He was an old family friend, and I had explained everything. Shared the videos, the fire incident, even the saw post. He couldn't take sides, of course, but he made it clear I had every right to secure my property so long as I didn't damage hers. And I hadn't. The deputy stepped out, gave me a long look, then turned to Karen. She unloaded every complaint she had in a single breath, waving her phone around like a sword. He listened, nodded, and then asked her one question. "Is your vehicle on his land?" Karen blinked. She stammered. She tried to spin it. "It's a community access road." The deputy pointed at the laminated deed copy I had posted on a nearby tree. "No, ma'am. This is a private easement. You've been warned before." Karen's voice broke into a high-pitched whine. "He built a wall around my car like a barn animal." The deputy turned to me. "Did you touch the vehicle?" "No, sir. Just hay stacked around it. Nothing leaned on it. Nothing touching." He nodded, scribbled something in his notepad, and then handed Karen a notice. Not a ticket, not yet, but a formal citation for trespass and obstruction of emergency access. Her face went from flushed to ghost white. She started to say something, then snapped her mouth shut and stomped back toward the wall of hay. She didn't touch the bales, not this time. She paced, huffed, tried to call someone, then finally gave up and sat down in the lawn chair again, arms crossed, fuming in silence. The deputy gave me a shrug, got back in his car, and drove off. I stood there for a while, just watching. The wind rustled the straw. Birds chirped in the trees above. For the first time in weeks, the road was mine again. She had boxed herself in, literally and figuratively. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was hay, patience, and the truth. And now she had no room to twist it. Her SUV sat in a golden cage, her tantrum documented, her authority cracked like old paint on a broken fence. She had turned herself into a spectacle, and I had given her the stage. Quietly, legally, completely. The story of the hay wall spread faster than a summer brush fire. By the time the sun had set that same day, half the town had seen the pictures. Someone's teenager had flown a drone over the scene, capturing aerial footage of Karen's SUV boxed in like a museum exhibit. Another neighbor shared it to a local Facebook group with the caption, "Modern problems require haystack solutions." By morning, it had over 3,000 shares, and people started driving by just to look. Some even left lawn chairs on the other side of the property fence, watching like it was a show. Karen, trapped in her own pride, didn't say a word to any of them. She just sat in her SUV, windows rolled up, arms crossed, and face red with a fury she couldn't let loose without making things worse for herself. By noon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, not because they cared about the hay, not because they cared about my land, but because the entire mess had drawn a spotlight on their leadership. And that kind of attention was something they couldn't handle. A few board members had been quiet about Karen's behavior for months. Now they couldn't stay quiet if they tried. Emails leaked. Voice messages got passed around. Turns out Karen had been using the HOA petty cash account to pay for weekly flower deliveries to her porch. She had also authorized herself a monthly landscaping stipend despite HOA funds being meant only for common areas. She'd gone too far, too long, and now her little kingdom was wobbling. Word reached me that several neighbors had filed formal complaints against her, not anonymous ones either. Real names, real addresses, real signatures. Some even included copies of fake citations she had handed them. One woman down the road, Evelyn, shared that Karen had tried to fine her $200 for putting up holiday lights in April. Another neighbor, Theo, revealed that Karen had demanded they remove a wind chime from their back porch because it gave her migraines. That wind chime, he added, hadn't moved in 3 years. It was ornamental, and Karen didn't even live within view of it. The tipping point came 2 days later at the HOA clubhouse. A special meeting had been scheduled, and word spread like gossip at a beauty salon. I didn't go. I didn't need to. But plenty of others did. I heard there wasn't a single empty seat. Karen showed up dressed like she was running for office, clipboard in hand, but the crowd wasn't in a mood to be lectured. She stood at the podium and tried to twist the hay wall incident into a personal attack. She used phrases like targeted harassment and unauthorized construction, but people weren't buying it anymore. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled. Someone from the back yelled, "What about the fire he was trying to stop when you blocked the road?" Another person shouted, "How do you explain using HOA money for your new fence?" Karen lost her composure right there on the spot. She dropped the clipboard, stumbled over her words, then stormed out of the meeting with nothing resolved. The board voted that evening, 90% in favor of a no-confidence resolution. She was removed from the position of HOA chair by unanimous vote. Her authority evaporated like rain on hot concrete. Just like that, the woman who tried to run the neighborhood with iron rules and fake fines was left with nothing but her name on a list of banned office holders. Back at home, I dismantled the hay wall bale by bale. I loaded it back into the trailer and returned it to the barn. Not a single scratch on her SUV, not that she thanked me. She avoided eye contact the entire time, even as I gave her enough room to drive out without turning too sharp. She started the engine and peeled away down the dirt road without a word. The sound of her tires spitting gravel faded into the trees, and just like that, peace returned. But it wasn't just about her leaving. It was about what came after. A few days later, Theo brought over a plate of cookies, said, "Thank you for finally standing up to her." Evelyn dropped off a crate of eggs from her hens, grinning ear to ear. Even the Millers, who'd never said more than 3 words in a row, came by and asked if I'd be interested in helping them host a fall harvest event on my land. I said yes, not because I cared for parties, but because it felt right, like the road that had been blocked was open again in more ways than one. It turned out people had wanted to push back for a long time, but they didn't know how. They were worried they'd be fined, embarrassed, or isolated. Karen had ruled through fear, through letters, through silence. But one wall made of hay had done what months of meetings cooled it. It reminded people that rules aren't always right, and sometimes the best response to nonsense is not anger or shouting, but clever, quiet resolve. One evening, a week after it all ended, I found a small envelope wedged into the side gate of my property. No name on the outside, just a plain folded note inside. The handwriting was sharp and nervous. It said she was sorry, that she had gotten carried away, that the power made her feel important in a place where she had never quite fit in. It wasn't exactly an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing I was ever going to get from someone like her. I didn't keep the letter. I didn't need it. I already had everything I wanted, my road, my peace, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the land had spoken louder than any HOA letterhead ever could. In the end, she stayed in the neighborhood, but nobody took her seriously anymore. She walked her little dog on the far side of the loop and kept her head down when she passed my fence. The sign still stood, "Private Road. Do not block," but I had added something new beneath it, a small wooden plaque that read, "Patience builds stronger walls than anger ever will." Nobody asked about it, but everyone knew what it meant. Fall settled over the valley like a calm breath after a long argument. The leaves turned golden and red, the air grew sharper, and the scent of wood smoke drifted from chimneys all around. Life on the farm eased back into rhythm. The barn repairs were finished, the scorched section had been rebuilt better than before, and the animals had settled back into their routines. Most mornings I'd walk the path with a coffee in hand and the sun barely up, just to feel the quiet again. That path had seen fire, fury, and haystack justice. Now it was just a road again. Mine. Free and open, just like it had been before the storm named Karen rolled in. The fall harvest event Evelyn and the Millers had proposed turned out to be more than just a gathering. It became a celebration, a kind of unspoken neighborhood reset. We called it the Harvest Hay, partly as a joke, but the name stuck. People came from all over the community. Theo set up a makeshift cider stand near the edge of the pasture. Evelyn brought homemade pies. Kids ran through corn mazes we built out of extra hay bales. Someone even brought a band, and they played old country tunes long into the evening. I never meant to become the symbol of neighborly resistance, but somehow I had. Nobody said it directly, but the way they looked at me, the way they nodded when they passed, it was clear. The hay wall had done more than box in a vehicle. It had boxed in years of frustration and let everyone finally laugh at what had felt heavy for far too long. Karen didn't show up. Nobody expected her to. She had retreated into the quiet part of the neighborhood where no one waved and most folks walked their dogs in silence. The HOA had since reshuffled its leadership. Theo now chaired the board, and under his guidance, the rules were being rewritten with a little more sense and a lot less tyranny. They even put up a new notice on the HOA office door that read, "No rules shall override deeds or common sense." It was simple, but everyone knew where it came from. I started receiving letters, not the kind Karen used to send with threats or false citations. These were handwritten notes from folks I hadn't even spoken to. They thanked me. Some even apologized for not standing up sooner. One letter came from a couple who had moved away 6 months earlier, worn down by Karen's constant nitpicking. They said if the neighborhood had been like this back then, they might have stayed. I kept those letters in a tin box on the shelf in my barn, not because I needed the praise, but because they reminded me that standing your ground, even quietly, could mean something to someone else. One morning, not long after the harvest event, I heard a vehicle pull up near the path. I looked up from where I was repairing a fence post and saw a silver sedan parked respectfully at the edge of the property. Karen stepped out, alone, holding a small box. Her posture had changed. No clipboard. No sunglasses. No tight-lipped scowl. She walked slowly up to the edge of the fence and stopped a few feet from the post that still held the old sign. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I never thanked you for not damaging the car," she said. I didn't move. I wasn't sure what to say. She held out the box. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Just some cookies I baked. I thought it was the least I could do. I took the box, nodded, still not speaking. She looked down again, then turned to leave. But just before she got back to her car, she paused. "I didn't understand how much the land meant to people like you. I do now. I'll keep my side of the road clean from now on." Then she got in her car and drove off. I took the cookies inside and left them on the counter. I didn't know if I'd eat them, but the gesture mattered more than the contents. For the first time since she moved in, she had acted like a neighbor. Maybe not a friend, maybe never that, but a neighbor at least. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sky turn to fire above the hills. The land was quiet again, peaceful. Everything felt settled in a way it hadn't in a long time. The hay bales had been returned to their rightful place. The path remained open, and the shadows of old grudges had started to thin. Before I went back inside, I walked down to the wooden plaque I had nailed below the sign and ran my fingers across the grain. Patience builds stronger walls than anger ever will. It wasn't just a message for Karen. It was for me too. I could have shouted. I could have called the sheriff in the heat of the moment and demanded charges. But I didn't. I built something instead. I let the land speak for me. And it did. The next morning, I got a call from a local newspaper reporter. She had heard about the hay wall from someone in the county clerk's office and wanted to do a feature on creative neighborhood resolutions. I laughed and told her I wasn't looking to be famous. She said I could stay anonymous if I liked. Just a man with a tractor, a barn, and a good memory. I agreed on one condition. She had to end the story the same way I lived it. Quietly, without drama. Just the facts and a little hay. The story ran the next week under the headline, "Farmer uses hay bales to stop neighborhood nonsense." It was simple, clean, and it made people smile. I got a few more letters after that. One from a retired couple in another state who said they'd had their own Karen and wished they'd thought of something similar. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The hay wall was long gone, but its shape lingered in memory, and stories passed over fences and told in smiles. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming peace with humor and calm. And sometimes that's the loudest answer of all.